So if you're like the rest of the internet, you probably watched the movie Tenet and had no idea what was going on inside the movie. Well, that was most people's experience. I know that that was my experience when I watched it the first time too, which makes it the perfect movie for a therapist breakdown. Because...
Don't try to understand it. Feel it.
Just kidding. I'm not going to turn this into a feelings class, and I'm not going to try to decipher the movie through that statement. But what I am going to do is I am going to explain my theory about why Tenet is a very confusing and frustrating movie to watch from a neurobiological and therapeutic perspective. But first, we're going to break down that last scene, the ending scene of the movie Tenet, where everything kind of starts to come together for the protagonist, and hopefully for you as the viewer, except maybe not. So I'll break down that scene, and then I'll offer my theory for why I think this movie is a very confusing and frustrating movie to watch. So let's get started.
Thought you were inverted.
Change gears halfway.
The characters in this field are coming out of this mission that was what the whole movie was about, where they saved this algorithm part that the whole movie was about finding and putting together, or at least part of the movie was about. So they had just finished that mission and they're literally catching their breath after coming out of that whole thing. So that's what we're seeing right here, right now.
Thought you were inverted.
Change gears halfway. Look like you needed help here.
Yeah, need help down there. How'd you get that lock open?
It wasn't me. Didn't your team need you?
Get him on the next pass. Right,
Honestly caught my breath.
And this is also the moment where, from the protagonist's perspective, things are starting to finally come together. This little sentence right here.
Thought you were inverted.
I thought you were inverted. If you were to rewatch the movie, you'll catch the protagonist making questions or statements like this all throughout the movie, where he's asking questions, trying to figure out what's going on and what's making sense. But really what he's doing is this thing that our brains all do, and that's something called making the unknown known. Our brains are hardwired to keep us safe. And so at any given moment, our brains are always doing so many different things, but one of the things that our brains is always doing is that it's always scanning the environment for the unknowns, and it's always trying to make the unknown known, because the unknown is scary, the unknown can lead to dangerous things. So our brains are always doing that, and I think the protagonist's question stems from that. Another thing that our brain is also always doing is scanning for incongruence. Scanning for the unknown is one thing, scanning for incongruence is a different thing. Incongruence is when things don't match up, when someone says they did something but it actually does not match up with what we see, when someone looks like they are smiling but really we can feel some kind of a tension between us and them. And in the protagonist's case right here, he's also scanning for lots of incongruence that happens throughout the movie. Neil said he's inverted, but he's no longer is. There's a lock that was locked, but then somehow Neil caught it open. So the protagonist is doing this thing that we all always do on some kind of subconscious or conscious level.
No one who's seen this leaves the field.
Alright, and things took a dramatic shift right here when suddenly someone's gun got pulled out. If we were to take a look at the scene, and if we were to actually back up to a wider shot, you'll notice that there is like this smoke, dust coming up. So the dust has not yet even settled into the air. They're still recovering from this big mission. But also, if there's something else we could see in the air, it would be this adrenaline that's probably pumping through all of them. We can't see it because adrenaline, as you probably know, is like this little hormone or this little chemical that our brain secretes in our body to prepare us for things that are scary and big. And so we can't see it, but if we had cameras that magically could, we probably would see that secreting into the air. And that's exactly what made this scene suddenly turn into hostility right here, because there's still that lingering adrenaline inside everyone. And when we have so much adrenaline pumping into our body, even if it's coming down, our bodies is literally in like this hyper vigilant sensing danger state. And so because we're still inside that fear response state, we are very prone to blowing things out of proportion and to see any slight movement or any slight action or reaction from the people around us as slightly out of proportion. In Ives' case, he genuinely thought that the protagonist reaching was a threat to him, and so the gun was pulled out right then and there. Obviously, this makes sense in the movie's context, but it also can be extended to the outside real world. Unfortunately, how many mishaps have happened with the law enforcement because people are under that fight-flight response. There's this adrenaline pumping into their body, and it shifts and skews their perspective perspective, and so many lives end up being lost because of that. In families, in relationships, how many times has it happened where people say things that they genuinely probably did not mean, but in the heat of the moment, you know, we call it the heat of the moment, that's when adrenaline is pumping into our body, we are in this state of mind where things are blown out of proportion. So how many of us have said things that we don't mean and have hurt others, but it's only because we are in this state of mind that is slightly abnormal. It's a state of mind that is designed to protect us in times of danger. But if that state of mind is activated when really we're with our loved ones, is it not normal and expected that we then end up saying things that are out of proportion and incongruent with the relationship that we have with our loved ones? This happens all the times in families. This is how people get hurt. This is how people end up cutting off one another. It's almost always tied back to a moment like this one, where people are in the heat of the moment, there's adrenaline pumping into their bodies, and things end up being said that people end up regretting or not actually meaning. You know, there are people that will hold on to the things they say for dear life, but really they might be incongruent with who they are and their values as a human. This is also applicable to couples. One of my mentors actually puts pulse oximeters on people's fingers, and it's like a little machine that registers people's heart rate as they are in couples therapy, and if it starts to beep at 100 beats per minute, which is when we know adrenaline is already pumped into our body, one of the signs at least that adrenaline is pumping into our body is an elevated heart rate. So if the beeping thing starts to beep, showing that your heart rate has moved up to 100, my mentor would literally have everyone stop, take a deep breath, calm it down, and they will not resume the conversation until the machines have deemed that their heart rate are at a stable rate, that they are no longer in this adrenaline state. And I love that. I mean, I never got to try it in my own therapeutic practice. Maybe one day I would. But it goes to show that really we cannot have conversations with our loved ones when we are in this state, because fatal things may happen. Now, hopefully no guns will be pulled into anyone's head, but extreme enough things will happen that are not good and healthy for the relationship. So if there's anything you can take away from this video, it might be this: never ever have a conversation when you are in this adrenaline state. How do you know? Well, if you feel that your heart is pumping slightly faster than it is, it probably is in that state. And it doesn't mean that you can't have the conversation, it just means be mindful of it. If it's too much, then yes, maybe a break is warranted and needed. If not, then maybe in the moment monitor it. Take a deep breath, pace yourself. Talk a little slower, look outside the window, do whatever it takes to continue to regulate yourself and keep yourself at a place where you are not full-blown in this adrenaline state. If this is something that more people do, I'll probably have fewer clients than I do right now. And so many families and so many relationships will be much healthier and much more supportive than they currently are right now. So it's a very small thing, but very important thing.
You're not gonna kill us.
If I ever find you, I will.
You won't look too hard.
Yes, I will.
Not going back to London to check on Kat, are you?
No, it's far too dangerous.
Even from afar?
Even from afar.
Now, Neil is unofficially the mentor. From Joseph Campbell's hero's journey model, he fits that mentor or guide that every hero needs on their journey. And so by now we kind of can recognize Neil has served as his mentor throughout this whole journey. I love Neil's character. He's actually my favorite character in this whole movie. And I just love this line right here because it's so full of care and so full of love for the protagonist, and we could see the mentorship reek from him. And that's what we want to find, by the way, in a mentor. If you're someone who's looking for a mentor, you want to look out for these moments. When are moments where I've interacted with someone and I felt this care from them? So the question that Neil is asking, yes, might be trying to follow up on the mission and how it's going to end. But in my opinion, I think that there is more to it. As mentors, it's kind of like that. Usually they're people who are maybe a few steps ahead of you on their journey, whatever journey it might be, either life or maybe at work or spiritually or anything else that's specific. And you might interact with this person and you find that care from them. And that can be a mentorship moment. You don't need to officially have a mentorship ceremony where you ask the person officially to become your mentor. Kind of like the protagonist and Neil never had some kind of an official thing between them. It's just something that naturally happens between people when you have experienced them often enough or consistently enough and they have secreted this love and care for you. You can kind of begin to trust that maybe this is a mentorship relationship, and you don't need to put a label or a name to it or anything. You just need to lean into it and seek the guidance that comes from it. Whatever thing you may hear from them may come with this dose of goodness that you need in your life. And you want to really value that and honor that because it's a precious thing that not a lot of people get.
Ives! Wait!
You're really going back in?
So the protagonist's question right here about, are you really going back in? It might stem from genuine concern that he has for Neil. By now they have a bond between them, and he genuinely does care about Neil. So it might stem from that, but also I would argue it might stem from that thing we talked about in the beginning. Once again, making that unknown known, scanning for unknowns, what's really going on, what are you doing, and eventually that's what's going to lead up to the big reveal, which we'll see in just a moment here.
I'm the only one who could have got that door open in time, right, Ives? I don't know any locksmiths as good as you.
See? It's me in there again. Weaving another pass in the fabric of this mission.
And then I love Neil's response, again, so full of love and tenderness and care that only a mentor like Neil could offer and provide.
Neil, wait!
And then this look of recognition on the protagonist's face. He's suddenly catching up on the fact that he has really not been in on this whole time. He's been on the outside. Something has been going on, and he's been catching up, and now it's suddenly clicking that maybe he has been so much farther out than he thought he was.
Just save the world. Can't leave anything to chance.
But can we change things if we do it differently?
What's happened's happened. Which is an expression of faith in the mechanics of the world. It's not an excuse to do nothing.
So Neil is always, as a mentor is, a few steps ahead of the protagonist. So in this moment he is too. He's recognizing that the protagonist is catching up and probably going to realize that Neil is going to die going back into that mission. So he's offering him reassurance before the protagonist even gets there or gets to the point where he needs that reassurance. And I just love that about Neil.
Which is an expression of faith in the mechanics of the world. It's not an excuse to do nothing.
Fate?
Call it what you want.
What do you call it?
Reality. Now let me go.
Neil continuing to look after the protagonist.
Hey, you never did tell me who recruited you, Neil.
Haven't you guessed by now? You did. Only not when you thought. You have a future in the past. Years ago for me, years from now for you.
This hurt that we're seeing on the protagonist's face. Now, it could be hurt from the fact that he's realizing he's parting ways with Neil. He's not going to see him again. Neil's going to pass away. Maybe all these realizations are daunting upon him. But there's another layer to it, which I want to highlight here.
You've known me for years.
And that's the layer of secrets.
For me, I think this is the end of a beautiful friendship.
But for me, it's just the beginning.
The protagonist is now suddenly realizing that Neil has kept a lot of things for him. And on a relational level, anytime secrets happen between people and anytime it's discovered, there's a rupture that happens relationally. So it's possible that the hurt that he's experiencing is from all the other factors, but it's also possible that there is this hurt that he's also coming to terms with. That's a human hurt, recognizing that this person that he trusted has actually kept secrets for him. Researchers talk about how there are different types of secrets. Relationally, there are sweet kinds of secrets, and these are the secrets that are kind of like, you know, when somebody throws a surprise party for someone. And then there is the essential secrets, which are secrets that are more human and more normal. You know, not sharing parts of myself with you, not out of malice, intent, or deception, but partly because we're not that close yet, and so I'm going to naturally disclose when the time is right that this is another piece that you didn't know about me. And then there are these toxic secrets, and these are things that people usually lie about. In relationships, this can be an addiction or an affair, or if somebody has debt that they're hiding from someone else. And they call it toxic because keeping something a secret does not allow progress in the relationship, and at some point when it's discovered, things will unravel in some way. And then lastly, there is the dangerous type of secrets. Abuse, suicide, these are the kinds of things that fall under this category. And then it's a spectrum, right? So anything in between. And of course, there are many functions of secrets, right? Sometimes secrets can be bonding, you know, we may have our own little secret together. Sometimes they're for maintenance to prevent turbulence in the system. Sometimes it's for privacy, for defense. There are so many different functions that secrets serve. In the context of this relationship, I will say that the secret that Neil has kept from the protagonist this whole time probably falls between the essential and the toxic category. And had there not been this layer of trust between them and this love and bond that they have built throughout the movie, I do think that something like this may have actually unraveled their relationship in some way. But the protagonist recognizes and realizes that Neil had to do this because of all the other complex rails, and I think that the trust that's in place makes it so that this does not turn into a big rupture. There's the human rupture, right? We could tell that the protagonist is still hurt by it because that's what secrets do. Anytime there's secrets between people, there's a layer of hurt that it always comes with, but the relationship will move forward. And then there also might be factors such as, you know, this is the last moment he'll ever have with Neil. Is it really time to talk about, oh, I was hurt by the secret that you kept from me? So that's also a factor to consider as well. Regardless, I love how it's something that you can still catch on the hurt on his face. And this is something that's universal. This is the function of secrets, and this is what secrets do in any relationship. So be really mindful of how you manage and if you have secrets in the relationship, because at some point or another they come to light. That's what they always do. They always come to light, even when we believe 100% they never will. Every secret that I've ever come across has always come to light at one point or another. So you want to be mindful of that, and you want to be mindful of all the other components and all the other layers of complexity that secrets present in a relationship.
For me, I think this is the end of a beautiful friendship.
But for me, it's just the beginning.
We get up to some stuff. You're gonna love it. You'll see. You're only halfway there. I'll see you at the beginning, friend.
Goodbyes are always hard, and sometimes what can make them easier is the knowing that they're not forever. That maybe I'll see you one day, even if it's just a hope, even if it's not real. Just that knowing can make them slightly more bearable, slightly more easier. Of course, we never really part ways with people. There's always a part of us that we keep inside of us from that relationship, and so we always hold on to someone even when they're long gone.
You're only halfway there. I'll see you at the beginning, friend.
And that's what this little line from Neil, "I'll see you at the beginning, friend," in my opinion is about. It's Neil continuing to look after the protagonist, continuing to offer him comfort and reassurance like Neil has throughout this whole movie.
We're the people saving the world from what might have been. The world would never know what could have happened. And even if they did, they wouldn't care.
So after watching this movie, I sent a message to one of my therapist friends about this line right here.
So no one cares about the bomb that didn't go off. Only the one that did.
The world doesn't care about the bomb that doesn't go off. And jokingly, her and I both laughed because we both realized that this is exactly what our work as therapists can sometimes feel like. We're doing this work that's so hidden and so private, and no one usually knows about it, but it's big work, it's important work, it's shifting work. And I think that even if you're not a therapist, maybe there's room in your life to find acts of goodness that are a little bit more like this. In the world that we live in today, everything is glamorized, and all we want to see is the people who save the world from the bomb that went off. But what about the people who saved the world from the bomb that didn't? How many of us have little ways in which we can do that? The little acts of kindness that we are all capable of on a day-to-day basis that can go such a long way for someone, that can alter someone's trajectory. As a culture, are we due for some kind of a shift to begin to internally and also externally value those acts? And as a person, maybe it's something you can begin to think about as well, to keep some aspect of goodness that you do offline, off the radar, and to really cherish those moments as the moments where you save the world from the bombs that never went off.
It's the bomb that didn't go off. The danger no one knew was real. That's the bomb with the real power to change the world.
Those, I would have to agree with Neil, are probably the more important things to save the world from. And that brings us to the end of the movie and the end of the scene, the end of the breakdown. And so by now, it's possible that you are still very frustrated and have no idea what happened in the movie if you watched it at the time, or even by now by the end of this clip. Or maybe you've skipped around in the video and you're just watching this right now just to understand why this movie does not make sense. And this is the part that I will say. So I have two theories about why I believe this movie might be slightly confusing. Theory number one comes from the neurobiological perspective, which is that we have this thing in our brains called mirror neurons. And mirror neurons tend to pick up what other people are experiencing or feeling in a movie. So if we watch a really sad movie, a lot of times we tear up ourselves. I believe that in this movie, the protagonist's experience is a very frustrating one. At every point in the movie, the protagonist is trying to understand, and yet he's failing desperately too. And I believe that we pick that up. I think it's such a strong emotion in the movie that even if everything did make sense, because the protagonist plays it out really well and portrays it really well, the confusion in his face is there always, we inevitably pick it up from him. So that's theory number one, is that we pick up on that despite the fact that the movie, okay, I won't say that. The movie is actually confusing. But even if it wasn't, I really do believe that we would have picked up on it because of these neurons that we have in our brain called mirror neurons. So that's theory number one. Theory number two. Remember when we first started and we talked about how the protagonist is also always scanning for the unknown and scanning for incongruence in the environment? A second theory that I have for why this movie does not make sense is that in a way, that's what we as the audience are doing in the movie. We start out and we're kind of scanning or watching for what's happening, what's not making sense, and can we make sense. In most movies, the reason why we find movies very satisfying, so many reasons, but one of the reasons why we find movies very satisfying is because a movie by inherent nature satisfies that need that our brain has of making the unknown known. We start out in a completely different and strange world that we have no idea about, and throughout the movie, anytime we meet an unknown, something is revealed to us, and then that desire to make the unknown known gets satisfied a little bit until we get to the end of the movie and we have a whole coherent picture. This movie does it differently. This movie intentionally is confusing, and so every time we try to seek to make the unknown known, we're met with frustration because we really don't know, and that continues throughout the movie. And after so many of those moments, of course we'll get frustrated, and of course it doesn't make sense. Now I would challenge you to watch it again, and if you did or if you haven't, I would love to hear from you in the comments down below if a second try actually made it make sense. Maybe you're one of those people that got it from the first time, and if that was the case, kudos to you. And maybe you're one of those people who watched it 5 different times and still does not make sense, and I'd love to hear what your theory is. But those are my 2 theories about why this movie doesn't make sense. Which brings us to the last part that I will say, and that is, even if this movie does not make sense, if we were to allow that part of us to half step aside, that rational trying to understand, making the unknown known part, if we were to have that part half step to the side, maybe what we'll find is a little bit of this emotional fulfillment at the end of this movie. And I know that sounds like a really loaded statement. That sounds like I'm repeating the don't try to understand it, just feel it thing. So hear me out. When I first watched this movie, I too had no idea what the movie was about. But I found myself that inevitably by the time I got to the end of the scene, something shifted inside of me. I didn't get it the way lots of people did, the way the protagonist did. But what happened inside of me was I had this reassurance feeling, specifically from the part where Neil talks about
What's happened's happened,
what's happened.
which is an expression of faith in the mechanics of the world. It's not an excuse to do nothing.
When Neil says that, there was something inherently reassuring about that. In that, as a human in the world, putting myself in the protagonist's shoes, I was reminded of times when I had no idea what I was doing in the world. There's something comforting about knowing that even when you have no idea what's going on, maybe one day you will. And maybe even if you never do, maybe you can trust that you showed up at every given moment with the best that you have, given what you knew, and that maybe that counts for something. That maybe that was enough for you and for the people that are involved and for the people around you. And it is that inherent belief that I believe is what carries us into the world, because the reality is, like this movie, the world does not make sense. The world is full of unknowns. You have probably experienced things that until this day you're wrestling with and trying to understand why they happened and why did they have to happen. That will never go away. The world will always be confusing in that way. And I think the only thing that can carry us in these moments is what Neil talks about here, this call it what you want thing. Some kind of inherent belief in that things are bigger than us and things are beyond us and we may not understand them, but who knows, maybe one day we will, or maybe we never will, but things will still be okay. It is that piece that I think is what carries us through the difficult times in life, and maybe, if I may say, what makes this movie worth watching. So those are all my thoughts and feels about this movie. I'd love to hear from you. What are your thoughts about this breakdown, about this movie? Anything, leave it in the comments down below. I would love to hear from you. And until next time, from one human to another, I wish you well.